running against Joe Crowley, who's been a centrist and who doesn't even live in the district and doesn't really represent the people. So here's an interesting story. Justice Democrats, which is a party invented to primary corporate Democrats, Khanna is one of the most prominent members of the Justice Democrats. He's the congressman from Silicon Valley here in California. Khanna doesn't take corporate money, and he's very progressive, and he's anti-war and all that stuff, all the good things you want. Medicare for all, free college. He endorsed Joe Crowley, which everyone considered to be the corporate Democrat and the one who's in the leadership position. They say he's next to take over for Nancy Pelosi, or he's positioning himself for that. So Roe endorsed Joe Crowley, and everyone went, "Wait a minute! You're supposed to be a Justice Democrat, and you're a progressive. Why would you endorse that guy?" So he then took a lot of heat on Twitter and social media for a whole day. And after that day, he came out and said this. He said, "I have listened today to hundreds of progressives from around the nation who have been inspired by Ocasio-28 campaign. I am equally inspired and dual endorsing her. I explain why I support Joe, but I want to affirm Ocasio-Cortez's bold progressive positions. As a son of immigrants, I feel strongly we need more millennials, women of color, disenfranchised communities entering the political process. She is a trailblazer. Competition is good, and the voters of the New York 14th District will only benefit from the spirited elections." That's Khanna. So that's what he said. We're going to have him explain his decision and a lot more right now. Khanna, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We're talking with friend of the show, Congressman Khanna. He represents California's 17th District, and he recently made the decision to co-endorse both Joe Crowley and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez over in New York's 14th district race for Congress. Ocasio-Cortez is the progressive challenger to Crowley, the establishment Democrat. Roe's here today to try to explain why he decided to co-endorse both of them. So, Roe, go ahead and tell us what happened. You first endorsed Joe Crowley, and tell us why you endorsed Joe.
Well, so I'm as you know, I'm a freshman member of Congress. Joe's our conference chair in the House, and I had done a bill with Barbara Lee on legalizing marijuana, and Joe ended up supporting that bill and getting folks on board with it. And, you know, he got on Medicare for All and got on the as an original sponsor to the Workplace Democracy Act, which would allow and make it easier for unions to organize. So he asked me for my support, and I said, okay, here's someone who's, in my term in Congress, moved to the left, supported my legislation, and offered it. Now, you know, the mistake I made in candor was that I really didn't follow Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's campaign. And she's run a phenomenal race. She's gotten most of the progressive groups and activists behind her. She's clearly the more progressive candidate. She had pointed out that, she's for a federal jobs guarantee. She's not taking any corporate PAC money. And so, I remember what it was like running against an incumbent. And I said, I want to be supportive of her. And the best thing I thought I could do in the circumstance was to endorse her as well, which made me the only member of Congress or senator in the entire body who has supported her campaign, or frankly, as she puts it, acknowledged her campaign. She's pleased with it, and a lot of folks have been pleased with it, but fairly, I've been criticized by a number of folks saying, well, why are you dual endorsing, and why don't you rescind your endorsement of Crowley, and why don't you just endorse her? But I feel comfortable with my decision and think it's in a good place.
So you were one of the, I think maybe the first member of the Justice Democrats. So you're a part of that organization, the Justice Democrats, formed by Kyle Kulinski and Cenk Uygur.
Yeah.
And so that group or that organization was formed specifically to primary corporate Democrats. And so you can see why it leaves a lot of people scratching their head when you endorse someone who's a corporate Democrat perceived to be over a very progressive candidate. So that's why it's and also in Dianne Feinstein's race, you didn't endorse the Justice Democrat in that race either. You endorsed Kevin De Leon. So that seems kind of. Can you explain that? Like, if you're a part of an organization.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, go ahead.
So when I joined Justice Democrats, and if you talk to Kyle or Shaikat or Corbin, I said explicitly, I'm happy to stick to all of the platform, but there's no way that I can endorse every candidate that you're running on the slate. I mean, you're running 50, 60 candidates. I will endorse individually, but I'm not going to commit to endorsing the slate. And in fact, I talked to Cenk and Shaikat and Corbin explicitly about that. Now, I've endorsed probably 16 Justice Democrats, and a lot of them across the country, more than any person in Congress by far. But there have been a few races where I haven't endorsed the Justice Democrats. One of them was in Feinstein's race. Now, I was the only California Democrat, I think, and maybe Jimmy Gomez also, who endorsed against Feinstein. So it was a bold enough move to go against Feinstein. But at the time, I thought, Kevin would have a better chance of making it through the top two. And I didn't want a Republican making it through the top two and Dianne Feinstein not having any competition. And so that was my logic behind supporting Kevin. I like Allison Hartson. I think she's done a great thing. I've said nice things about her, but I was explicit that even with her, that I, thought Kevin would be able to give a more formidable challenge, and is not as progressive as I am on some issues, but he's certainly far more progressive than Dianne. In most of the other cases, in many cases, I stayed out of it. In about 16 cases, I've supported the Justice Democrat. In Crowley's case, it was literally that we had worked on the legislation together, that, he had been working with the Progressive Caucus. But I do see, given how inspiring Ocasio's campaign is, in retrospect, I wish I had just stayed out of it. I think it's turned out well, and that my endorsement for her has created probably more attention and momentum, and she's been very, very gracious about it.
So, yeah, ironically, this actually has gotten more attention to her race, so it probably has helped her. An unintended consequence that actually I think has shined more light on the race and gotten her more press, and more people are aware of her because of it. So, and she has thanked you. So, and she has and encouraged people who support her to, as she said, get your back. So,
but I want to be clear that I'm not trying to be a politician. It was a mistake. The correct thing to do is what Bernie does in a lot of these races. He just stays out of it. I mean, you can't. He's he's bold in principles. He's also in politics, and he understands. He's got to work with colleagues. You can't go endorsing against every one of your colleagues, or you're never going to get any legislation. But you certainly don't have to go affirmatively endorse people you don't agree with. And it was a mistake. I'm not perfect. I should have probably stayed out of it. And that's going to be my view in the future. If there is a progressive alternative, I'm just going to either endorse the more progressive alternative or stay out of it. I think what rubbed people the wrong way was, why are you endorsing someone who's not progressive when there's no need to? Like you said, I think it worked out, and I think even Alexandria will tell you that it's worked out in her benefit. But for me, it was a learning experience, and when I make a mistake, I'll admit I was wrong.
Now, you've previously said that you are to the right of Bernie Sanders. What policies are you to the right of him on?
I saw that article in The Intercept. I don't necessarily. That's not how I would characterize it. I would say that I'm a little bit different in certain perspectives. Let me give you one example. In our federal jobs guarantee plan, Bernie's plan is only public sector jobs. I have said that's good, but I have said that we all should have it to private sector jobs. And the reason I've said that is when FDR had the right to a job in the New Deal, he talked about the right to a job in farms, in an industry, and in mines. When you look at Denmark's subsidized employment model, they actually have subsidized employment for the private sector as well. And we've got 126 million private sector jobs in this country, about 23 million government jobs. And I don't think people should be not have any opportunity in the private sector, particularly good union jobs, painters, glazers, electricians. We ought to be subsidizing some of those apprenticeship programs. So there are areas that I'm not, obviously no person is 100% aligned. But when it comes to his core principles of Medicare for all, when it comes to free public college, when it comes to labor organizing and the role of unions, getting corporate money and PAC money out of politics, I have supported and advocated for a lot of those policies.
So, this flap over your endorsements, which seems to have actually worked out for the better for everybody involved, except for maybe Joe Crowley, it's kind of highlighting the problem that progressives have with the Democratic Party, right? So, my theory here at this show is I support progressives wherever they are, if they're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican. But also, we're questioning the strategy of trying to take over the Democratic Party because it's not happening. 2 years after Bernie's primary run, here we are sending Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi, and Kamala Harris. They're the representatives from the bluest of the blue states. So when Bernie would say it sounds like you're ready for a revolution, and now it sounds like everybody, including Bernie, is working for incrementalism. Isn't what you guys are doing the definition of incrementalism right now?
Well, it's a great question. Let me say two things. One, on policy, I think there has been a pretty seismic shift. I mean, how many people were talking about Medicare for all? Now you have even moderate Democrats endorsing Medicare for all. You've got free public college become the mantra for the Democratic, most of the Democratic Party. The biggest difference, I think, has been on foreign policy, and we've talked about this, Jimmy, often. I mean, we've been in some very senseless wars, and there is a emerging consensus in the Democratic Party that we should not be aiding Saudi Arabia. We shouldn't have been have strikes in Syria. Frankly, I criticize Schumer for his hawkishness on North Korea, but there's several House members who believe we actually should be engaged in diplomacy there. So I think ideologically, the party is shifting to less militarism, to more economic justice, caring about the poor people's campaign and economic rights. The question is, have the faces changed? And that is a long process. Look, I ran for Congress twice and lost before I won. Bernie ran, I think, 4 races before he won. And it's just with name ID and with the challenges of getting elected, that takes time. But you've had, I would argue, that Bernie delegates take over the California Democratic Party. Dianne Feinstein didn't get the endorsement of California Democrats. You've had a tremendous energy on the ground. The fact that, MoveOn.org is now endorsing Ocasio, the fact that I responded to people's energy for Ocasio should signal that people are listening, or if they're not listening, they're ignoring where the energy is. And I think it's a matter of cycles, but that's where the party is headed. Now, we've talked about this before. I don't decry third parties. I think third parties make our democracy stronger. And if there are people who are supportive of third parties and want to run as a third-party candidate or support a third-party candidate to put pressure on people like me, that's fine. That's democracy, and that means that raises the stake for me to earn your vote and your trust.
You frame the party as having moved to the left, and some of the rhetoric has moved to the left. But in fact, their policies have moved to the right. Nancy Pelosi just endorsed PAYGO. Now, if the leader of the party endorses PAYGO, that means any progressive programs are out the window. That's a conservative idea. It's being pushed at the top of the party. Also in the Senate, Chuck Schumer just let the Democrats enable deregulation of Wall Street once again, and all the Democrats voted for the extra $80 billion a year for the Pentagon. So their rhetoric seems to be moving left, but they seem to be moving to the right. In fact, the Democratic Party just passed another rule that seems to be specifically aimed at anyone who isn't a party loyalist, like Bernie Sanders, saying you have to be a Democrat in good standing, and who gets to decide that? The party will decide. And if they don't think you're a Democrat in good standing, you don't get to run in the primary. So I guess my question is, again, do you think the Democratic Party could be saved? Because it doesn't seem like even losing to Trump has changed them even a little bit.
Well, look, you bring up a very fair point. I mean, I blasted the Democrats who voted for deregulation of Wall Street and Dodd-Frank. There were a number of them in the House and the Senate. And basically, they were acting as if this deregulation would help community banks, but that what they were deregulating were banks worth $100 billion up to $250 billion. I don't know anyone who believes a $100 billion bank is a community bank. And all Dodd-Frank said is that those banks with $100 billion should have some basic capital so that if they go under or if they make a bad bet, they have the money to cover it, and it shouldn't be the taxpayers bailing it out. So that was a terrible vote. And if you folks following me on social media will see that I explicitly called out the folks who voted that way to push back from within my own party. And Elizabeth Warren had called them out as well. Now, I agree with you. PAYGO is also a wrong policy. I have cited Stephanie Kelton's work. She's an economist, and I don't for the life of me understand why the Democrats don't say we're going to invest in education and healthcare and jobs, and that's going to create 4% economic growth. That's the only thing that ever has grown the economy, and that's how we're going to be financially strong. Instead, we're always seeming like we're trying to pay for things and be cautious with the deficit. The Republicans talk about tax cuts, job creation, economic growth. So it's not just substantively wrong, it's politically wrong. And I think it's constraining our party. We ought to be a more aspirational party that talks about our policies leading to economic growth. So I agree with you substantively there. I completely agree with you that these military budgets are insane increases. You can't criticize Donald Trump and then give him another $80 billion to wage war overseas. We're in 14 countries overseas. I voted, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, but I voted against that budget, as did quite a few House members, as did Bernie Sanders in the Senate. So there is a core group of us who believe we need a strong economic populist policy and restraint on military spending. We'll point out that we've spent $2.5 trillion in outlays on Iraq and Afghanistan. You could have had policies to have everyone have a free college education. You could have had infrastructure. You could have had a jobs program for that money. You could have moved towards Medicare for all. But the question you're asking is this fight winnable within the Democratic Party or not? Obviously, I am a Democrat. I believe it is winnable in the Democratic Party. I believe we've had leaders like FDR. I believe we've had leaders like Paul Wellstone. We saw the success of Bernie Sanders. You've had people like Mario Cuomo who speak about the promise of some of these ideals. And so I do think it's a winnable fight within the party, but it is going to be a fight.
So you think the Democratic Party can be reformed and it can be saved from itself?
I do. Now, look, I think that Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, I mean, that's my view, need to be the nominee of the party in 2020. I mean, I think they have to, if you have someone who is not going to have that progressive view, I think you're going to have a lot of backlash. So I think we need to nominate someone on the top of the ticket in 2020 who is a real progressive.
Should Democrats even take money from the military-industrial complex?
Well, look, what I've said is, we shouldn't take corporate PAC money or PAC money of any kind. We shouldn't take lobbyist money. Everyone has their own ability of where they take money. I mean, look, I don't know where everyone's money comes from in all details, but I do know their voting record. And what I'm concerned about is why are you having people vote for military budgets? Why are you having them vote for interventions? Why are you having them vote for deregulation? I think they should be held to account for that. Otherwise, we're in an imperfect system. I mean, I've said let's get rid of the private money, have every American get $50 to spend on campaigns. And Russ Feingold and I put out this proposal of democracy dollars. We're probably going to get a few people signing up for it. But until we can get that type of reform, people are in an imperfect system.
So you're the congressman from Silicon Valley. What is Silicon Valley?
Yeah.
What do they most want you to do for them?
Well, right now they are in. They probably. They saw themselves as the good guys in the world, and a lot of people are asking questions. But they don't agree with all of my policies. I mean, I said that their taxes overseas should be taxed. I've said that H-1B visas need to be reformed. It's been abused and hurting actually American workers' wages. I've said that we need to limit stock buybacks. But I do say that technology is a force for good in the world. I mean, I guess I think that tech is not just evil, that the technology has made us more interconnected. The technology can properly used get more people engaged in the process. And a lot of people have been left out of technology, and we got to figure out how do we get more people to have opportunities in technology. And so I think they are sympathetic to that part of the agenda, where I've gone to Paintsville and Youngstown and Detroit and trying to figure out how do we get tech and innovation in other parts of the country.
Do you think Google should be broken up?
I don't think they should just be broken up, but I do think there needs to be far stronger antitrust enforcement. And I have called for two things. I've said we need to look at antitrust, not just about consumer welfare, but about the impact on wages and jobs. And so if they were going to acquire something or merge, I think that would have to have huge scrutiny, just like I thought Amazon Whole Foods should have had huge scrutiny. I also think there needs to be the FTC and DOJ needs to be beefed up, and they need to make sure that any searches don't favor their own products, and that it's perfectly in line with competition, and that there's strict competition. There are those who believe, Google should be broken up. Keith Ellison, I haven't come out for that. I think that there's an argument for not just breaking something up, but I do think, that they need to have far stricter antitrust enforcement. And that's why I formed, actually, the Antitrust Caucus with Keith Ellison and David Cicilline.
So, we really appreciate the work you've done on foreign policy. You've raised awareness about our complicit, where the United States, is complicit in helping Saudi Arabia commit a genocide in Yemen. The biggest human rights crisis happening right now in the world is happening in Yemen, and the United States is enabling that. So why? And most of the country on the left and the right would like the end to these foreign wars, right? Instead, the exact opposite happens, Ro, and it keeps happening, and it doesn't seem like it's going to get reversed. So, the Democrats right now, everyone's up in arms about ICE. The Democrats were complicit in the formation of ICE. We don't need it. And then Barack Obama, his first term, he ramped up ICE on steroids, right? And his first year deported more people than Trump's first year. So this is the problem. What is your message to progressives who saw the party cheat Bernie Sanders? They never really addressed that, and Bernie never addressed it. And now in this primary season, they're cheating the progressives again. We saw it happen in Texas. We saw it happen up and down the ballot here in California, and I've seen it happen in New Jersey. We've seen it happen all over the place. So what is the message? Why is it smart for progressives to get inside a party that is working against them and doesn't represent them? What are progressives to do today?
Well, here's what I would say. I'd say that in the long run, I believe a politics based on conviction wins. And when it comes to foreign policy, I think it's not just progressives, but as you pointed out, it's even people on the right who are asking, why in the world are we in these interventions overseas that haven't made our country any safer? Why are we in Afghanistan for 17 years? Didn't Trump promise to get us out? Why did we go into Iraq? Why did we topple Gaddafi in Libya? Why did we encourage the coup in Yanukovych in Ukraine? What are we doing aligning with Saudi Arabia? How in the world is that in the United States' interest? I do believe that that's a fight we're going to win because our values are also consistent with restraint in American foreign policy. That's been part of our tradition going back to John Quincy Adams or George Washington. And then you look at Howard Dean's campaign or Barack Obama's campaign against the Iraq War or Bernie Sanders or even Trump running criticizing the Iraq War. You realize the American people are sick of these wars, and we just need to continue to mobilize. The broader question, though, is a tough one. I mean, I get that the progressives have not had the victories that they would have hoped for, but I think they are making progress at the grassroots level, and I think they have to look at the changing demographics of this party. Look, you know my story. My grandfather spent 4 years in jail in Gandhi's independence movement. There are a lot of people in Congress, the new next generation, who come from backgrounds sympathetic to human rights and civil rights and have that mindset. And I think in the long run, in 5-10 years, we're gonna win. Now I know that's not solace to the families being split up, and it's not enough for the vulnerable populations and people dying in Yemen. And so I understand the anxiousness and frustration of progressives, but I think they've made more progress than in years, and if they keep at it, they will win. They will take over the soul and energy of the Democratic Party. I do think the nomination fight is going to be a very interesting one. I mean, if you don't get Bernie or Warren and you end up with Biden, for example, I do think that will be discouraging to a lot of folks.
Yeah, I mean, the Democratic Party doesn't have a message for half the country didn't vote. And a lot of the people who voted for Barack Obama did not vote for Hillary Clinton. And yet they say so what is the Democratic Party's message to those people, the people who voted for Barack, and that they saw that he didn't do anything for them, and so they were discouraged, and the half of the country that doesn't show up to vote. Now, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama will blame, they wag their finger at the voter, and they say it's your fault for not coming out to vote, when we all know that the onus is on the politician to inspire people to come out and vote. And if you can't inspire someone to come out and vote, it's pretty lame to wag your finger at the electorate and say they're the problem. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. Look, I lost 2 elections, and I thought, what could I do better? Not why didn't people vote for me? And frankly, I should have lost the first election to Mike Khanna. I mean, I didn't run as good a campaign, and it made me a better candidate. So I don't think blaming voters is a smart strategy or right. I also think Barack Obama is probably not giving himself enough credit. He was one of the most inspiring candidates, and really ran on an inspirational message. I thought Hillary's campaign, I don't want to pick on her, but, she ran, it was mostly an anti-Trump campaign. And a positive message is what inspires folks. I think we have to run on a very simple thing. First of all, Barack Obama said, I'm not going to have DNC PAC money, lobbyist money. We overruled that policy. I don't know why in the world we would do that. Let's make sure we're at least doing what Obama said, which is get the corporate money and lobbyist money out of the DNC and out of any of our presidential campaigns. I mean, he showed that work. Second, I think we're going to need more substantive economic policy in places left behind. I admire President Obama. I worked for him, but he tried to American, Asian American communities. The reality is there is a huge divide in economic opportunity, and it's going to require massive investment in education and jobs, in historically black colleges and universities, in healthcare to bridge that divide. And I think that the Democrats need to offer a real vision. The problem is if you just offer incremental policies, if you say, look, your life's not we get that your life's not going that great or your kid's future, and we're going to give you this marginal tax cut, or we're going to make sure we create this jobs training program. People say, well, that's not really doing anything. We've got to convince people that we not only get that they've been left out of this new economy, but that we have substantive, bold proposals, a new deal for the 21st century to help them, to make sure their kids have a shot. And otherwise, I don't think we're going to earn back their trust.
Well, you're not going. Well, it's the position of this show here that you're not winning. The Democratic Party is not winning back the trust of the people because Nancy Pelosi said the people don't want change. So her position is they're not going to change, and that if things just go back, it's an election cycle, and it'll turn to the Democrats' favor. So she's not planning on offering the people anything. Chuck Schumer is endorsing Trump's move of the in Israel of the embassy to Jerusalem and endorsing all that carnage there.
Right.
Also letting he's letting the deregulation of Wall Street happen. So my point is the Democrats aren't reaching out to those people, Ro. They don't have a plan. You keep saying, you've said a few times in this interview, I don't know for the life of me why the Democrats would do that. Well, we all know why they would do the things they're doing. It's because they're bought and paid for by corporate donors. That's why they don't offer the people anything. That's why they do that. You scratch your head. Why are the Democrats doing that? It's because they're taking corporate money and they're not going to get off it. Right?
Well, I think look to the people who are on the right sides of these issues. Bernie, of course, Warren, Mark Pocan, Pramila Jayapal, Keith Ellison, myself. I mean, scrutinize people's voting records, but there are those of us who are saying we've got to be for a more just foreign policy and restraint. We've got to be regulating Wall Street. I mean, it's just common sense. We've got to make sure that we're investing in jobs, in Medicare for all. And I think this is that offering a substantive vision for the 21st century is a platform that many have shared. Now, I get your point that the leadership has not embraced all of those positions, and that in some cases they have had a lowest common denominator. Let's just have everyone pick what they need to run on. I don't think that's going to be the case in 2020. I think we're going to rally behind a progressive agenda and a progressive vision. And what I say is give some of us a chance to win over people in the country. And I think give yourselves a lot of credit. Look at my own response. I got into an argument. I mean, I'm always blunt with someone on my team this morning, and he said, "Well, your dual endorsement of Ocasio is going to really upset a number of your colleagues, and they're not going to be able to work with you on some of these issues." And I said, the only thing that matters in moving Congress is the will of the people. That's what's going to change things. And I responded, as was obvious, more to what you said and Kyle Kulinski said and the Humanist said and people on Twitter said, not because I'm weak, but because that represents the sentiment of people, of active people. And I think more and more people in Congress are going to get that the inside game is not worth playing, and that people today, there's almost more influence and power outside the body than inside the body. The rules of politics have changed. And so I guess what I would hate to see is for all these progressives to be at the ascendancy, to be now being listened to, and then to give up. I think that this is the time to double down and to continue the fight, and to know it could be a 10-year fight. It's not going to happen overnight.
So I just wanted to, relate to you the disillusionment the progressives feel, not only for the party, but just kind of in general. And so it would be nice if the party did try to have a new deal for the 21st century. And the fact that they don't have one is going to depress the progressives. Now, if Bernie doesn't win in 2020 as a Democrat, which is what it looks like he's going to run as a Democrat, So if he doesn't win, the party effectively cheats him again. Then there's no progressive movement. Instead of spending 4 years building a viable party outside the Democratic Party that actually represents progressives, he would have built nothing. I just had a conversation with my friend in New York, and he said, I have to stay a Democrat. If I wasn't a Democrat, I couldn't vote for Cynthia Nixon. And my point is, wouldn't it be great if Cynthia Nixon had a viable third party that actually supported progressives, that she could run in and she didn't have to worry about being cheated by her own party? And of course, there's no answer to that. So I'm just letting you know the angst that's out here. And, we see people who run as progressives and then they get co-opted by the Democratic Party, and it's heartbreaking and it's demoralizing. And so that's what it looks like it's happening with Bernie. He's playing by their rules. And, and then your double endorsement was also very head scratching to people. So this is the problem. And that's why half the country doesn't vote. And I don't know I know you know this, but I just don't know. The way we've been doing it hasn't been working. And so I'm just encouraging people to come up with new ideas. So, Ro, before I let you go, I just want to, again, I sincerely thank you for all the consciousness raising you've done about foreign policy and all the good work that you're doing as a progressive. We really do appreciate it here at the Jimmy Dore Show. Before we go, housing prices are out of control in California. You cannot afford minimum. If you're a minimum wage worker full time, you cannot afford housing in California. Is there anything that the federal government, and you're a congressman, is there anything that the federal government can do to help affordable housing here in California? I mean, the federal government used to be a massive builder of homes, no? So is there anything we can do?
Yes, we should have the HUD give grants to cities and regions to be able to build affordable housing. That's not going to happen under Ben Carson. Here's the challenge. I mean, I know Scott Wiener, he's thoughtful. He said, well, why don't we just require cities to build affordable housing? The problem is these cities often don't have the money. And if you can't just give unfunded mandates on cities saying build housing without funding their public transport, without funding their schools, without providing them with grants to be building that housing. So my proposal is have massive investment by HUD, the housing department, in cities that are going to build affordable housing or housing near jobs. Let me end because I really appreciate you're always having me back on and being fair but tough. One of the things I often say to folks is I think those of us in Congress will do better coming on your show and taking tough questions, answering them, admitting where you go wrong, or having a debate. I mean, people are so afraid to engage. So I hope they'll continue to have me back on and call me out where you disagree. But I am more optimistic a little bit than you were, Jimmy. One, I'm optimistic at how much Bernie Sanders changed the debate and did change the energy in the party. I also think it's beyond a cult of personality. It's not just him as a person. I mean, I know there are people who've been disappointed with Warren, but I've seen her advocacy on Poor People's Campaign and against Wall Street, and think that she is in it for the right reasons. I've seen Mark Pocan and Pramila Jayapal and Keith Ellison and Rahul Grijalva and Jamie Raskin. I mean, people who really believe in some of these values in Congress, and that gives me hope. And I guess everyone has to make a determination for their own selves. But to me, it's, size up someone and where their gut is and values are. And if you think they're ultimately about, in some sense, Dr. King's legacy of having less militarism and more economic justice and are fighting for that, then, try to be, to support or be supportive. If you think they're not for that, then be disappointed. But the bar, very few. I'm never going to be my grandfather, who spent 4 years in jail with Gandhi. Right? I mean, he was a greater human being. That the people like Dr. King, greater human beings. We're in an imperfect political system, but there are those of us who have that ideal and are doing our best within this system to push for that, to get the Democratic Party there, to get our country there. And we want to be criticized but just know that we're trying within a system that's not great to bring as much change as possible.
All right, Khanna, I appreciate you taking time to spend time with our little show here and get your message out. And
you got more than a little show. You got a big show there, Jimmy. I appreciate it.
All right, Khanna, Congressman from the California 17th District, a Justice Democrat, doesn't take corporate money, a true progressive, brings light to issues like the Poor People's Campaign and what we're doing overseas. Thanks for your service. Thanks for your work. Thanks for coming on the show, and best of luck. The next live Jimmy Dore show is July 1st in Portland, Oregon, July 15th in Chicago, and July 27th in Burbank, California. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all those tickets to those shows. Plus, don't forget, become a patron to help support independent media. We give you hours of bonus content every week. Plus, every Saturday at 2 p.m., we do our Solid Chat Saturday. It's our live stream on Saturdays, 2 p.m. Pacific time. Stick around for that. And please make sure you're subscribed. Even though you think you are subscribed to this channel, they're unsubscribing people every day. Just check. Click subscribe and then click the bell to make sure they send you a notification when we're dropping videos. Otherwise, they won't tell you. Thanks for your support.